The way we structure today, the idea behind it is that we are kind of moving a little bit into alternatives territory. So if the first half of the day was all a bit, doom and gloom and how it's all terrible and there's no hope, then maybe the second half gives us some glimpses of hope. But the question, of course, is how hopeful should we be about these projects of hope? So how alternative are these alternative systems? What is the role of work and labor within these alternative systems? So these are sort of some of the questions we'd like to ask. So at the end of the day, we're also trying to then put the first gloomy part of the day together with the hopeful one, and to see what are the next steps. What do we actually do specifically and concretely to kind of move things forward, hopefully, and what can we, as academics, as activists, as civil society organisers, what can we do to make things better? So we start off with, so we're going to have 4 presentations. We're going to start off with Abigail, who will talk about work on allotments.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
Hey there. I realise we have an international audience, so I should start out by saying what an allotment is. Allotments are tiny parcels of land that are usually run by local government entities and are available for rent very, very cheaply by individuals and families. There are 300,000 approximately of these in the UK at the minute, and you may know, if you live anywhere near London, that there's a 40-year waiting list for an allotment in some parts of London. Is anyone here an allotment owner, allotment holder? No. All right. Anyone on a waiting list? All right, so I know who I'm dealing with. Oh, there we go. The work I'm presenting is based on an ethnographic research project that I did in Newcastle upon Tyne in the north of England. And it's specifically focusing on busy people and why busy people would need an allotment and desire an allotment. I'm going to focus today on a particular aspect of that, a particular dimension related to time and time scarcity. And as an inspiration moving into the study, Derek Jarman, the filmmaker and artist, was certainly, oh, look at me, on the screen. With that side? Yeah. All right. He was an inspiration to me. You may know that during his battle with HIV/AIDS in the early 90s, he built a beautiful garden in the shadow of the Dungeness nuclear power station. In his reflections on his time spent in the garden, Jarman wrote, "The gardener digs in another time without past or future, beginning or end, a time that does not cleave the day with rush hours, lunch breaks, the last bus home." And he contrasted this time with his very busy filmmaking life, in which his sense was of a time with beginning and end, literal time, monotheist time, for which you are unfailingly charged. So taking Jarman as my inspiration, I was interested in exploring the juxtaposition between time spent on the allotment and time spent in professional work roles and also caregiving responsibilities. I was looking at people in full-time work, included were nurses, IT consultants, business consultants, teachers, housing officers, and I was interested in why this type of person would choose to add such a time-consuming responsibility to their already full plates. My methodology was quite autoethnographic. The first plot that you saw was my family's plot in Newcastle. I worked at 2 sites in a fairly affluent area of Newcastle where I live, although I'm not affluent. There were 6 months of field work at my own plot, but I also spent a lot of time hanging out with people on their own plots. I'd conducted 35 recorded conversations on those plots. And additionally, I worked with a friend of mine, a photographer. We did a 3-day photo shoot where we worked with plot holders to create portraits of themselves on their sites, on their land. I want to say a little bit about what I mean by busyness in the context of contemporary wage labour. This wonderful picture is what I might see as the archetypal knowledge workplace of the 21st century. This is the Google office in Canada, in Ontario, equipped with fun slides. Certainly there's a lot of evidence that contemporary knowledge work in the types of capacities that I've mentioned is quite often fun. It's often very autonomous and fairly flexible, but the critical literature draws our attention to the fact that there's a dark side to some of these jobs. Certainly we've got a culture of overwork and intensified roles where we feel we've got to constantly re-qualify for our jobs or relearn skills. And even where longer hours are disputed, and they are disputed in the literature, there's a sense that most of us, and I would assume most of us here, are walking around feeling that we don't have enough time in the day to do what we need to do. So again, the question is, why would someone like this choose to add something extremely time-consuming to their schedule? And one of the keys for me came out of an interview that I did with a guy who works in a confectionery factory. He's an engineer, quite a senior engineer in a local chocolate factory. And he said to me, the weeds are growing and you've got to keep on top of everything. It does make you make the time. My fallback position on a Saturday and Sunday morning would actually be to have gone into work. So this guy was happy that somehow this allotment that he needed to keep in shape was helping him to compete against the encroachment of work into all aspects of his life. And certainly allotments are known for being fairly regulated places. The sites that I was looking at are quite strictly run. Once a month somebody walks around and checks that your weeds aren't growing too high. You get a warning called a weed warning, and possibly eviction if you let them get really out of control. There's also informal normative controls where your neighbour does not want to see their plot infested by your dandelions, and you might get some dirty looks. So certainly these people were enjoying, I found, some of this structure that was forcing them to take time off work. This is Sam. He's a business consultant. He's got 2 teenage kids, and he told me a story about how recently on a business trip he tried to go into a bookstore and he was going to browse in the bookstore, and he said in his student days that would have taken him a whole afternoon, and to his horror he found that he had forgotten how to spend time in that way. He had forgotten how to spend time in a desultory fashion. So he feels that by coming to the allotment, which is something he is bound to do to keep those weeds in order, he's rediscovering the art of pottering and spending time in a dilated fashion. Certainly there's a sense that it's a privilege for these people to take time out against this backdrop of intensification, which often they enjoy. They enjoy the intensified labour that they do. But then this is a lovely contrast. And certainly Hattie, she brings her phone, she sets the alarm for a couple of hours, and she reads and reads, totally forgets about time until that alarm goes off. Another thing that's interesting about allotments is normatively, you're not really meant to be talking on your mobile phone, and you're not really supposed to be sitting on a laptop. There's things that you cannot do or feel that you shouldn't do when you're on your allotment. And this creates a false sense of, or a real sense, we could argue, of abundant time, of being temporarily time-rich in this space. There is a tension, though, time pressure encroaches constantly in this niche that people have created. And certainly Andrew, the confectionery engineer, felt that although he enjoys his plot very much, it's made other things more difficult. He's now juggling more things by having an allotment. And I found fantastic examples of huge multitasking, or intense multitasking. This guy, you see this wooden structure? It's a sand pit and gravel pit, so that when he's looking after the kids, in his only spare time off from work, he plonks them in so that he can get on with the digging, and then he's doing two things at once. So there is a sense of a sort of intensification in this niche that people have created. As I've read through the data, I found myself thinking back to the work of Arlie Hochschild, who is one of my favourite ethnographers. She wrote a wonderful book called The Time Bind about very busy workers at an American corporation called, well, she calls it Amoco. And what she found was that busy people create a sort of potential self that is a romanticized version of themselves that's more relaxed and has wonderful work-life balance. And this involves buying things. This guy bought a lot of craftsman's tools. Along with the tools, perhaps John has tried to purchase the illusion of leisure they seem to imply. She talks about some of the other wonderful things that people have bought. John's tools seem to hold out the promise of another self, a self he would be if only I had the time. And some of you may own some of these types of things that are in the attic. But as I looked at my allotment data, I felt that because of the obligatory component, it was perhaps a little different. That by feeling a little bit coaxed to inhabit that potential self in however tense and however embattled a fashion, these particular workers were on a voyage of discovering what that time felt like and being made, playing a trick on themselves, if you will, to sort of enter that space and start to relax. And in that space, I think people sometimes felt that they started to change. This computer project reviewer said he turned jobs down because he feels, no, that's the summer, and that's when I'm picking in the allotment. So people were starting to re-identify their boundaries. And the landlord who said, you know, he told me what his work-life balance used to be like, and it was horrendous, but now he feels that he's getting it right. So certainly this is an area that I think has limitations in terms of the structural constraints that these people find themselves in. Certainly allotment time, garden time often gives way to the pressures of intensified contemporary work, as you can see by these outcomes for some of the people that I've mentioned. But what I did find is that they sustain a very romantic but real loyalty to garden time, and that is something it's an enchanted space in which there is a great deal of possibility. Thank you.